two really, really good hitting coaches, and we get to hear them speak on whatever we want today. So we'll be selfish and ask them the questions that we want, but again on the sidebar. And but if you don't mind, since I'm looking at you right now, Neil, go ahead and give us a real short snapshot of how you or your journey through baseball and how you decided to get into coaching.
Gotcha. Well, I had good experiences coming up in baseball, starting in Little League, going through high school, great coaches. A lot of my good friends now I met way back when, and have stayed with them through baseball. Went off to college and had a great experience there. Played 4 years in the minors with Tampa Bay. And I was a pretty good defender, not an amazing hitter. And I was going to the field doing baseball every day and just felt like I could maybe be a better teacher than player even, and had a good experience, but decided to stop playing. At the time, I'd finished my degree. I was going back to do grad school, and I wanted to do sports psychology stuff. I'd had good experiences with Ken Ravizza during my time at Fullerton as a player, and thought that was an area that I could help guys. And so went back and did grad school, was doing the sports psych stuff. During that time, I was doing stuff with different teams, a lot of different sports, even coached college golf for 2 years at Fullerton, men's and women's golf, which was a neat experience, but felt
Wow.
like baseball was the area I knew the best and could have the greatest impact, and just wanted to be on the field, be in the competing as much as possible. So I was putting together PhD packets, and coaching college baseball seemed like a better route than continuing the school and trying to be a professor. So
Mm-hmm.
walked over to the baseball field at Fullerton that I was going to a lot and said I wanted to be around as much as possible. And I was a manager that year. And then here I am now after the years after that.
I love it. Ronnie, go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely had a good experience playing growing up, and had an opportunity to play at Cal State Fullerton. And actually, for people that may not know, Neil and I were teammates. So we've kind of grown as players and then grown as coaches together as well. So after Fullerton, I was fortunate to play 6 years as well in the minor leagues. And when my career ended, it was kind of, I got out of baseball for a brief stint, and just kind of reevaluating. Like, my wife and I moved to the Midwest, and she went back to school, and just, I was a realtor for a
Oh.
year. And then I was a finance manager at a car dealership. And then just, I got the bug, man. I started missing it, started missing being back out on the field, missing being around the guys, which I think for everybody that, gets away from baseball for a little bit, that's what you really miss, is just showing up to the yard every day and getting to be around people that love the sport like you do. And
Mm-hmm.
so I did that. I got the opportunity from Rick Heller, who's at Iowa now, to be his volunteer at Indiana State back in 2000, well, fall of 11. And 2012 was my first year coaching there at Indiana State, and kind of just did that for a couple of years. And then I got to coach at Cal State Fullerton, and then I got to coach at Loyola Marymount, and now I'm at University of Washington.
I love it. And I think every time I see you guys, or one of you, both of you are together. So I know that you guys are very like-minded in a lot of different things, which I think that leads to a really cool conversation. And so I'm going to start with, I'm going to go back to Neil. This was your first year. Okay. And it was obviously a slightly abbreviated year, which sucks for all of us. But let's go back to like that first meeting. So you show up on campus, and you didn't recruit most of these guys, if any of these guys really. And so you show up on campus, and you got this plan put into place of what you want to talk about. Walk us through what that was. I know I've got your document that you sent me. If you want me to pull that up, I can do that as well. But just kind of walk us through what you thought was important to get across in that first meeting, because I think it sets the tone for everything else.
Gotcha. Let me you hear me all right if I go no
Yeah,
headphones?
that's fine. Sure.
That's better for me. Felt like I was in a cave or something. Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
Yeah, just thinking about this podcast and all the stuff we'll cover. I shared that document because it kind of organizes a lot of the thoughts that I have, and maybe even keeps us on track. But I think it's good to show that a little later. I can go into
Sure.
that question before then. But as far as first meeting, it's really interesting starting to coach a team that wasn't your team the year before.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in grad school, I was working with some teams, and I was fortunate to be around a couple college teams that had just started or been around new college coaches. So I personally had a little experience with that, but it's always new, obviously, and you don't know what to expect. And so in the first meeting, we'd met as a staff, and Dave Serrano, our head coach, was leading a lot of what we wanted to do and how we wanted to approach it. And for us, we took over that program, and it was interesting because there was a period of time where there was no coaches there. So there were some current players that were figuring out if they wanted to stay or go. There was incoming players that were figuring out if they wanted to go to Northridge or go somewhere else, which is all very understandable. And so when we got there, we pulled in some guys late recruiting wise, and we felt it was important to make sure that the guys that were there knew that we appreciated that they were there. And we also didn't know what we were working with. So one of our decisions was in the start of the fall. A lot of what we did was watching what they do, and kind of seeing what we were working with before we fully said, okay, this is what we're going to do, and let's change this, and this is more important than that. We wanted to see what they were like when they were hitting. How did they go about the defensive stuff? And so our initial meetings, that was something that we conveyed to them. And obviously, we started to create the practice structure and the structure of all things, even down to like where the baseballs go. We started saying, hey, this is good, and this is, maybe an important thing here. But there's a period of time where we just hit and we saw what we were working with. And looking back, that was a good thing. And I think that allowed them to realize that we wanted to see who they were and how they were. It wasn't about us, which I think is important. It was about them. And then once we got all together and they knew what they were working with on our end, and we knew what we were working with, then it was about, okay, how do we make all of this as good as possible as a group?
No, fantastic. And so Ronnie, you've gotten the last couple of years to be able to find your guys and to understand the changes that they need to make. And so you've gotten that luxury. And so tell us a little bit about that, because that's a completely different dynamic of when you have a group of guys that you know versus like with Neil, a group of guys that he doesn't know. And I love that answer, by the way. You're just kind of letting them be free and figure out what they're going to do, which I'm sure they really appreciated. They wouldn't want a guy that comes in and just says, hey, you got to change all of this stuff in the first week. But that's awesome. And so just walk us through kind of what your off-season plan was like. Ronnie, back to you. And then we'll get into some communication within that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I came into the situation with the University of Washington. Last season was my first season, and I was coming into a team that had just been to Omaha and had
Mm-hmm.
some kind of established success rolling and going pretty good. So it was a unique experience for myself to kind of come in and have guys that had experience with success, and making sure, kind of like what Neil was talking about, not to come in and try to, overdo things and try to tell them like, hey, we need to change a lot of what you've been doing, because a lot of what they were doing was giving them success. So
Mm-hmm.
being careful not to, go in there with that mentality. And, a lot of that first year was about trying to build trust with guys.
Mm-hmm.
And then coming into this year, and I think as we'll talk later, that's a lot about what hitting is, and being a hitting coach, especially at our level, is we're dealing with young men that are trying to be better, and trying,
Mm-hmm.
you have to build their trust. And so that takes time a lot of times. And that's not something that's really easy to accomplish in a short amount of time. So letting guys have some freedom is a big deal there. This fall, what we did, after spending the summer with some guys that I really respect in the game, and just spending the summer just evaluating what we could do better and how we could train better, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
We did a lot more this fall with machines, and making sure our guys were in an atmosphere where it was difficult. It was a difficult setting, and that was something that was a little bit different than how we had approached it in the past, and how I've approached it in the past.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely used our fall for kind of implementing systems and working on swing techniques and mechanical issues, any
Mm-hmm.
changes that we wanted to make. I'm a big believer that basically you try to get your guys to leave at Christmas break with a pretty good plan for what they need to do within themselves, within their swing, within their setup. And when they come back, hopefully they're in a good place, and they put the work in during the break, and they come back and it's not a lot of, hey, we have to revamp this, we're going to clean this up. It just becomes, come January when we're back at it, it becomes a time to compete, a time to win a job, and a time to kind of roll with the swing that you have, and step into the box with your best chance to be successful without thinking about all the mechanical issues, especially in that spring.
I love that. I love that answer. And Neil, again, with both of you guys, you're unmuted. So if you have anything, or if you guys want to play off of each other, that's fine too. And then I'll just facilitate questions when I need to. But I did have a question as far as, so you're setting up machines this fall, and that was new, right?
Uh, Not new, just the probably the amount that we hit
Okay.
off the machines was more.
Okay.
So I think a lot of us have used machines, but I think what we did this fall was just try to implement that to a higher degree, and make sure that it was difficult, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and it was the atmosphere of, and what we talked to our guys a lot about it is when you have a difficult machine, you have
Mm-hmm.
to approach it like it's a competition. And a lot of guys can get discouraged because it's hard. And all of us that were fortunate to play the game, and try to hit off of a machine at throwing hard, it's a difficult thing to do, especially, it's hard to find timing. It's hard to the machine might sink one and run one, and it's going all over the place. So it's difficult, and it's easy for guys, and especially if they're in groups, to get discouraged and just kind of agree that it's hard, that it's too hard. But then if you can get them to believe that it's a challenge and the game's hard, and they're not always going to be successful in trying to overcome that, I think that's what's the best part about using the machines as much as we did, is just letting
Mm-hmm.
them overcome the difficulty of it.
Right, and that was leading to what I was going to get to next. Is was there a conversation that you had with those guys of like, hey guys, we're gonna fail in practice, because again, with you, they're trying to impress you every day. Same thing with Neil, and it's one thing to to have this plan as a coach that you're like, man, this is going to make them better in practice, right, or better in games, because they're gonna fail a lot in practice. But it's another thing as a player, you're like, man, I look like crap right now, like in front of these coaches that I'm trying to impress. So was that a conversation that you had with those guys?
I know that we did, yeah. I mean, and it's a balance between making it so difficult that they don't feel good. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then so there were days, and I would call them feel good days. I wouldn't tell the players they were feel good days, but there were days
Right.
where we get in the cages more, especially if we'd been doing a lot of difficult stuff, just to kind of get that good feeling back, that confidence back, get it rolling back. But it's pretty impressive, man. If you looked at guys that step in the box early against some of the heavy velo that we're doing or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
how much they've been able to adjust to that and get better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's that's a testament to our guys, and just and getting the group to understand that, hey, this is not about making you fail and make you feel bad. It's about competing and finding a way to beat a machine. And if you can really approach it like that, it becomes pretty special when you have a bunch of group guys jumping in, and all of a sudden you're leaving to go home at night and they're in the cage and they're hitting off the velocity machine, and you're like, oh, that's cool. They think
Mhm.
it's making them better, which I believe it
Right.
is.
Right. Neil, you got anything to add? Machine work or just anything that we've talked about in general?
Um, yeah, I think as I hear you guys talking, it kind of touches on the point that a lot of players want to feel comfortable.
Hmm.
A lot of activities, whether it's hitting or other things in baseball, if it's not easy and they haven't done it before, there's some pushback at times.
Hmm.
And I see that a lot of that is because that's what they're used to, and, whether it's a high school player, a college player, or a pro player, until they've been around some of the really, really, really good players and realize that those guys struggle or those guys are failing, realize that maybe, yeah, that guy's in the big leagues, but when he was a freshman in college, the velo machine was hard for him, even if he's an all-star in the big leagues. Or, there's different settings on machines that, you can do with multiple different pitches and whatnot. And the guys think oh, that's not real. That's too hard. But when you see a really good player go in there and just mash off that machine, or at least do better than the rest, then that, tunes everybody into like, whoa, maybe I'm actually not good or not good enough right now. And I need to figure it out. So, using those examples and just understanding, how tough it can be. And then also some of those tough things can actually be mastered.
Hmm.
Um, and then I guess lastly, like, we've all seen the at bats in the big leagues of a guy that swings and misses a couple times, fouls it off, and then hits the homer. Like, you don't square the ball up every single time, and that's just something that a lot of players, they don't actually realize that, and it's scary to not be comfortable. But if you can get um, used to working and improving, and you get to see some people around you exceeding at those things that maybe you think are tough, when they become aware of that, they're a lot more open to it, I feel, in my experience.
I think oftentimes we forget how hard it was to be a player. I mean, when we're watching them every
Yeah,
single day and they're doing things that are really good, and it's like, oh man, this is really hard.
yeah, and you're gonna have funky days. I mean,
Hmm.
the guys that hit, an example I like to tell our guys is, if you take a guy, let's say in a pro ball season, which is tons of games, and he hits 300, there's going to be a month where he hits 240, and there's going to be a month where he hits 310, 270, and he might have a 350 month, and it all evens out to 300. But you could have watched him for a month and he hit 240. That doesn't mean he's bad. That's
Hmm.
just where he's at that time, and that's okay. It's a journey as a hitter.
Yeah, for sure. And so you use the fall, Neil, to try and evaluate, and you kind of let them, and Ronnie, you said kind of the same thing. You let them have some freedom within the boundaries of the time constraints and what you guys have got going on. But Neil, I just wanted to know, how long did you allow that before you started maybe suggesting some different things? And are there any, and we can go back and forth with this, but are there any just kind of things that you went in with an eye for, of like your biases, if you're like, hey, these are some different habits that most, if not, you could say all, or you could say most, these are the things that make most hitters successful. So question, I get this is a multifaceted question apparently.
You're good.
But how long did you wait to start suggesting things? And then if you guys want to kind of go back and forth between what you guys are looking for as far as just the swing goes, and just where do you start? It could be video, or it could just be watching a guy swing.
Gotcha. Um, when I'm planning out what to do, I start from the season and I work all the way back as much as I can. And whether it's hitting, base running, defense, whatever the lane is, whatever the category is, I got this big Excel spreadsheet with all the different things in each area, and I start thinking, okay, when do I want to start putting in A? When do I want to go to B? When do I want to go to C? And so in this fall, we chose to take a period of time, especially in hitting, where we wanted to see what we were working with. But there comes a time where, especially with a new group, because you have to put in so much stuff, and every year it's like John Wooden. You hear how he started with tie your shoes. Every year, even if he has multiple national championships in a row, he's going to start with how do the guys tie their shoes. And I've found that is a good way to do it, because even if you have a returning junior, he might think that tying his shoes is an important part, and that could nip him in the butt down the road. So we chose to give him a little time to do what they're doing. And then as coaches, you start to feel, well, we can only do this for so long before we start getting behind. And at the time, we put the priority, and I think it was a good decision, we put the priority on, let's see what we're working with. So if we're behind in certain areas, that's just how it was because of the situation we were in. Then when you start trying to influence the situation by saying this is good or this is bad, there's 5 or so things that are important that we feel are important with hitting and that are going to apply to everyone. And we could show that document a little bit later. But we all know that, or we have found that where you stand in the box is important. You got to be able to cover the play and get to different pitches. How you stand is important. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but you should be aware of if where you're starting is helping you get into a good swing and see the ball and whatnot. Timing, the position you get in as you get your swing going, the actual swing itself, and the finish. There's some unique things to the swing, but those other categories are pretty similar as far as what's good and what's not great. So when we see guys that are, not on time, when we see guys that are putting themselves in poor positions, trying to do too much, those things that we can sit there and go, we know for sure that if you're late, it's not good. Hey man, you're late. I recommend that you make an adjustment even before we start working on the details of how to do it. Sure. When you see those things that are going to work or be important for every hitter, it's just a conversation. So it kind of naturally started happening. And then, to wrap up my answer, because you have so many things that you need to be putting in, whether it's the situational hitting, the bunting, or you're just watching and seeing a guy not maximize his power, it becomes a conversation. And in my experience, it's pretty natural. If you say, hey, this could be better for these reasons, a lot of the hitters, if not all, are going to go, okay, yeah, I hear you. Let's do it.
RP, what do you got?
I think that, with what we want to teach as hitting coaches and what we value and what we think is important, we always do have biases. And I think that what makes you a coach and what makes you grow as a coach is understanding that, like, hitting's not black and white. It's, there's a lot of gray area in there. And, a lot of people right now are thinking, especially if you get on Twitter and get into some of these threads, it's hey, this is going to help make you a big league, or no, not that, it's this. And the reality is hitting's unique, and there's a lot of people with some unique skill sets and some different types of setups and swings, and the bottom line comes down to, does a guy square the ball up? And I think a lot of times, I'll be out evaluating hitters and I'll watch BP and love a guy's swing and not love another guy's swing, and then we watch them in game or after, at a showcase when they're facing live pitchers, and And the guy that wasn't great in BP is squaring the baseball up in the game, and the guy with the good swing is good, but he's late or whatever. So I think that we as coaches have to evaluate, like, hey, is this guy squaring the baseball up? And sometimes we're quick to change things because it doesn't look exactly how we want it to look. But you don't touch guys that are squaring it up consistently. And when we're talking about bias, I think that one of the things that where I've grown as a coach and trying to continue to grow as a coach is whatever worked for myself as a player doesn't mean that it's going to work for the players that I'm coaching. So, all of us are unique, and how we think is unique, and each individual player is unique. And I think the best guys understand that every player needs something different. So you have to be able to speak the language of each individual player, and not just have your own hard-headed bias of what the swing should look like in your brain. So I think that there, like I said, there's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of giving guys freedom. What I believe is the right way, in my personal opinion, is get guys to understand how to be as athletic as possible throughout their swing and throughout their setup. And then if you think they're doing something that's going to like prohibit them from being better or being good in the game, give them suggestions. But if you can teach guys, or if you can kind of guide guys into making their own decision on swing changes and setup changes, and
Sure.
really just feeling like they take ownership of it because it's their choice. I think that's the trick to being a good hitting coach is that if you see something that's a major flaw that's going to really hurt a guy, have him figure it out on his own, with your assistance, instead of just coming in and saying, hey, we got to change this. We have to do it this way. There are times where you have to do that too, but generally I think it's much more effective when guys take ownership of it and say, hey, like, well, it feels good when I do this. What do you got on this? I'm like, yeah, man, that's nice. It looks good. Looks right.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of
All right.
inceptionize them, as Neil would say.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to Google that and see what that word is. But as far as just getting them to build their own plans, okay, and then taking into account, we have listeners from youth level all the way to pro ball. What's your best advice? And I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on this, of getting them to own that, because I think most good coaches would say that we want the player to be their own best coach, but then we all have done this, what you just mentioned before, of pressing a plan on a player, because in the end we want them to get better, and so we think that that's the best way to do it. But how have you found and what has been successful for you of getting them to own a really good player development plan for themselves?
I'll go, Neil, first.
Go for it.
Yeah, I think what we've done, and what I think has been successful as far as getting guys to own that, is we spend our fall, like we talked about, kind of developing the guys within their swing. We work more mechanically in the fall. We work more on a lot of different drills. And I think my goal is to always spend the fall figuring out, through communication. There's a lot of, like, the guys probably get annoyed by it, but I'm constantly, hey, fill out this questionnaire. And it's basically like, where you at, what's working, what's not working, self-evaluation. And then basically throughout the fall, just trying to evaluate where each guy individually is at. And when they consistently tell you, like, hey, this works for me, like when I do this drill, I feel really good. I leave feeling good. It helps slot me in or whatever. And then essentially what we do is they leave for Christmas break with, we call it like a prep work plan. So basically it's their prep work for a game. And what people have to understand is, especially when we go on the road, we don't have access to cages on the road. So there's times where guys are going to step in the cage on a Friday before a game, and they're going to get in the cage and maybe be in there for 9 to 11 minutes, and then have to go out on the field, take their BP, and then perform in the game. So they have to have a really good plan in that 9 to 11 minutes to get themselves ready. So for me, the whole fall is about developing a good plan that you can do in a short amount of time that gets you the drills, whether it be tee, front toss, whatever it is. It could be offset. It could be whatever makes this guy right. And developing a kind of a good plan that gets him ready for the game. And literally that is different for every guy on our team. That's developed through communication. Like I said, I have my prep worksheet for each guy. And it's like, hey, this isn't really working for me anymore. Well, let's figure out another way to, do what this was doing for you, since it's not doing it anymore. So we try to have them communicate changes through that stuff with us. That's the biggest thing I think that frustrates me, is if a guy starts to make a lot of changes or drastic changes to his daily work without communication. And that's a breakdown. And that's what I talk to our guys about, is like, I want to be there to help you, and we're all there to help you. But if you're taking it upon yourself to go out and change a bunch of stuff without talking to us, then there's a disconnect. And that's where we develop issues, and guys start doing things and you're like, what the heck's that guy doing?
Right.
So.
Right.
When it gets to plan or approach, that is a very interesting area in hitting. And when you bring up Little League, high school, college, pro ball, like the most beautiful approach, the most beautiful plan is a really simple one. But in order to have the plan, as far as what you do in the cage or what you're doing in practice, or the approach, what you're doing at the plate, be simple, us coaches have to help the players get there a lot of times. One of the coolest things usually is when you watch little kids play, their approach is awesome. It's see ball, hit ball. And they're probably thinking, can I hit this ball hard, or is this a pitch that I can't hit hard, so I won't swing at it, which is kind of like the most beautiful, simple approach. But because as you go up, guys throw harder, have better command, have deceptive pitches, then you start having to change at times to make it so it's more than just see ball, hit ball. So for us as hitting coaches, we have to help the players become aware so they can handle some of the tougher things. But at the same time, when they get in the batter's box, it has to be simple. So that is, one of the true tests for us coaches when it comes to the approach part of it. A lot of times the plan, as far as how they go about their work, a lot of that is, what's going to happen in the game. Are you going to see some curveballs? Are you going to see some velo? Are you going to see inside and out? Okay, let's hit those pitches. But when it comes to approach, a lot of that's in your mind and what you're looking for and kind of the chess match that goes with the pitcher. So for us, when it comes to approach stuff, just like the velo machine being some crazy thing, a lot of times players can get into really detailed approaches that actually make them more passive, make them hoping that a certain pitch is there, make them, not aggressive, as opposed to just, hey, look out over the plate and let's whack the ball. And then if the pitcher is showing that there's a reason to change, maybe we make our approach a little more specific. But a lot of times looking out over and looking for something that you can do damage on and staying with that is good. It's not too simple. So for us, just educating them about that, kind of a less is more at times. And then, and Ronnie said it, he's starting a little more swing stuff earlier in the fall. We do the same. Let's create the foundation of the, quote unquote, controllable stuff that, the swing stuff is always going to be there, but approach is pretty fluid. So then, okay, if a guy is throwing sinkers and sliders down, what are we going to do? If he is really away, what are we going to do? If he happens to come in, are you going to get rattled about that and change everything? Or do we stay the same? Those little things are conversations. And we have a real large responsibility to communicate that stuff to each person in a way that keeps things simple and works for that person, because there's a lot of different ways to go about it. There isn't one way. It's very different player to player and where you're at in the season changes a lot.
No, that's fantastic. And just to piggyback off of that, I think that we've all dealt with players who we just, for one reason or another, we couldn't get them to listen to us. We couldn't get them to buy in. And Ronnie, you talked earlier about trust, and I think I'm with you, or I know I'm with you, and I think it all comes back to that. But you know what's your best advice with guys who maybe you just don't connect with? Because I think it's easier to connect with some guys than others just based on my personality, and either of you guys can take this, either one or both. But we all dealt with guys that we just, for some reason, we just don't connect with them. Maybe it's swing wise, maybe it's just they're a turd and we want to help them but they won't listen to us. Well, I mean, we've all dealt with that player, every single one of us. And so where would you go from there, and what advice would you give?
Yeah, I think that it starts basically for us, and we have an atmosphere at UW and the culture that has been created there by Coach Meggs, basically, where on a day-to-day basis we are constantly talking about the team, and it's always going to be that kind of mentality in everything that we're doing. And so when you have the stubborn player, and I think we all have those guys, and in all honesty, most good baseball players are pretty stubborn. But when you have the stubborn guy, it's probably not a lack of buy-in as much as it is a lack of understanding. And if they can understand that if everything we're doing as assistant coaches or hitting coaches is to help the team, and you're recruiting guys that are bought into that, I think that it helps you build that trust with those guys. But there are going to be guys that are going to, they're going to question a drill, they're going to question an approach. And I think a lot of times, instead of just continuing to try to ram stuff down the guy's throat or whatever, you gotta take a step back and figure out why is he not on the same page as me, and what am I missing for him? Because ultimately, it's not necessarily their job to believe in you. It's your job to believe in them and get them to understand what it is you're trying to do. There's not a guy out there that is not trying to get better. And I think that that's the beautiful part. If you do, and I know we have a lot of coaches with coaching at different levels, but if you have guys that are just kind of out there to be out there, then that's a harder thing to deal with. But every guy that I'm fortunate enough to work with on a daily basis is they want to be better. So my job, and something that I'm consistently trying to get better at each year, is to get them better and get them to understand that I'm there to help them. So nothing I'm going to do is going to be with intent to be detrimental to their success. Because if we can get the guys better individually, then if you have enough of those guys that get better, then your team's going to be better. So if they know that, I think that's the first step. But I think that if you can approach it from I don't need to get them to do what I'm saying. I need to understand what they're saying, where they're coming from. Why is this not working for this guy? What makes sense to work in my brain isn't working for this guy. Well, that's not his problem. That's my problem. I need to communicate it better.
I love that. Great answer.
Yeah, I'm Ronnie is right on with that. I think you first want to look at yourself. You want to look at your material, what you're saying, and the more you can be finding information, cross-checking yourself, talking to other people, thinking back to your experiences, remembering what it was like to be a player, that can keep you in check. And like I said earlier, using the examples, and if you're fortunate to have been around major leaguers, that's great. If you've been fortunate to be in some of the really special, tough positions, as far as deep in seasons and in tough championship scenarios, then you start to see what things do matter. But even if you haven't, a lot of it is the stuff that we already know is important. It's work hard, stay positive, stay consistent, try to get better. Like it's kind of how life works. It doesn't necessarily have to be unique because it's baseball. So you can hang your hat on that if you don't know what it's like to be, JD Martinez or what those guys are working on or what the World Series is like. And like Ronnie said, so much of it is figuring out where the player's at. And a lot of times that's kind of tough because you might not like what you find. There's a variety of reasons why some guys give you the not buy-in, not bought-in face, or they act that way. And maybe it's hard for them, or maybe they got something else going on, or maybe they just don't want to tell you they're working on something and they really believe in it. So, if you can have that conversation and you can be, approachable so that they can be real with you, then you're going to be able to have a chance to really get to where you're at. And then at that point, you can figure out how to do it, how to get to what you think is good. And, lastly, I think if what you're trying to have happen can be defeated, then it's going to be harder to get them to buy in. But a lot of times when you get to the bottom of it and you figured out where they're at, it's hard for a player to be like, no, I don't want to get better. I don't want to work hard. So sometimes it takes work, but that's what we're here for. That's kind of what our job is to get our group, whether we like every single one of them talent-wise person, how they go about it, it's our team. So let's try to get them better.
Oh, great answers from both of you. As far as you hit on game planning a little bit, Neil, just a minute ago, and so I want to be able to kind of pick your brain about it a little bit. College schedules for both of you are pretty set. You kind of know who you're going to see on the weekends as far as starters go. And so how do you approach game planning, providing scouting reports? Because I think you hit the nail on the head. We want a plan that works, but it's also simple for the player. And so walk us through your I don't want to say model, but just your process of providing scouting reports or game planning information to your players.
Gotcha. A lot of times we have a good amount of experience playing against a certain team, and maybe most importantly at times playing against a certain coaching staff. So you go into a series having some feel usually for how that program goes about their business. We have a program now called Synergy, which I believe every team has, where we can access video of that team, in their games that they've been playing. And that's a great resource, which allows us to really see. It used to be just scouting reports, and you'd have to, make calls, which we still do, and text people that know stuff about the team. But you start building your awareness of who you're playing. Maybe you've faced a certain pitcher, the year before or whatnot. And the thing with hitting that's kind of tough as you start building your plan is you're not guaranteed to know what you're going to face. So, a guy might be a fastball slider guy, but on Friday when you play him, his slider might not be good and he's more fastball changeup. Or, these guys are developing college kids in our job. So, they could be building velo as the season goes. And, we've all seen the scouting report in college where the guy's 86, 87, and you see that he's 92. And as a coach, you're like, oh man, wish I would have known that. So I feel like you got to be careful because you don't necessarily know what you're working with. And you have to be able to continue to have the trust that the players want from you. So if you say, oh, this guy's all away, and then the first three hitters go up and he's pounding them in, it's going to be a little harder for those hitters to be listening fully when you talk to them the next time. So that relationship is interesting. And like I said, with approaches, a lot of times you're going to just be looking out over the plate and then you'll adjust if the pitcher is giving you a reason to adjust. So if there's a unique pitcher that really has a unique sinker, or he lives at the top of the zone, maybe he really has a 12-6 curveball with depth or something, we'll use some machines or even pitchers, or staff that can throw that type of pitch to kind of get our guys' brains realizing that stuff can happen on the weekend. We'll do that maybe Wednesday or Thursday. So we try to simulate some of the stuff, but also all the while, I feel it's very important that when it comes to game time, they are getting into the box and it's simple. So I don't want to send them down some rabbit hole of, Wednesday and Thursday, they think it's all away, all this certain breaking ball, and all of a sudden they're thinking so much when they could have just been up there. We didn't prep them at all. They're looking out over the plate and they try to hit the ball hard. So it's a balance. And I personally don't give them tons of video and have them, reviewing everything every single day. And lastly, to wrap this answer up, we get to see the pitcher warm up. And, he's throwing pitches before the first inning. And then if I'm hitting 7th in the order, I get to see 6 hitters in front of me. So we're going to be developing what we're doing as the game goes. And sometimes it takes 6, 7 innings, but that's why we play 9. So a lot of stuff goes into it, but I think the most important thing when it actually gets to the players is that they're getting in the batter's box and things are simple and they feel that they can have a great chance to succeed.
Yeah, I'm going to touch on that. So, I think that keeping it simple is the key to game planning. You want to inform your guys and prepare them as well as you can. But, we've all seen the reports. I mean, if those of you that have looked at reports where it's like, hey, this guy likes to work away, but he'll finish in. Sometimes he elevates. Sometimes he likes to get you to chase slider in the dirt. And you could get guys to step in the box, be like, okay, so I have to protect the fastball away. It might get thrown in. He sometimes elevates, and then sometimes he wants me to swing at the ball in the dirt. So by doing that, all we're doing is just complicating things.
And they'll take a fastball down the middle.
Yeah. So we have the ability as coaches too to completely bog these guys down in a bad way. So I think knowing the pulse of your team, preparing them for what they're likely to face is important. But at the same time, not giving them so much information that they're literally in the box and they're fighting themselves or fighting their brain instead of focusing on the competition at hand with the pitcher. So that's always my goal. There's some guys on our team where I'll literally go up to him after we meet as a group before, and we're saying, hey, this guy, he's going to be 89 to 91. He likes to work to his glove side. That's his best side of the plate. He won't go to his off speed unless he's ahead in the count, and that might be a typical conversation we'd have before the game. And then I'll walk up to guys after and I'll be like, hey, this guy is basically going to throw it over that white thing. And if it's in the strike zone, you need to take a swing at it. And some guys are better with that, but I'm learning now that some guys, they want a lot of information. They want, hey, this guy's 65% fastball's first pitch. This guy, when he gets behind in the count, is going to go to his changeup. That's not typical, but this is how this guy pitches. And that helps certain players. And that's been a hard thing to understand and grow as a coach for myself, is because I didn't want to think about all that stuff when I was in the box. I tried to keep it. It was pretty easy, just keep my brain from working too hard. But I tried to just completely zone out and just focus on seeing the baseball. But there are guys that they want the info. So you have to be kind of individualized like we are with everything and what we've been talking about today, but you have to be able to give the guys that want and need a lot of information. You have to be able to give them that, but you also have to be able to take your other guys who need to just step in the box with a clear head. You have to be able to take them and give them what they need as well.
So how do you figure that out? You just ask them?
It's you're not going to find it on a spreadsheet. I can tell you,
Right.
It's through conversation, man. It's just getting to know guys. I think that what is special about developing the relationships with these guys is by the second and third year, I'll watch a guy walk up to the box and know how he's feeling, how he's thinking, kind of where he's at. I might see him take a pitch and be like, okay, this guy's this guy's not in there with the right mindset. You know, he's got the wrong approach. So a lot of that is through experience, to be honest. You know, and being around the game, and really studying the game. But a lot of it is just through the relationships of what certain guys need. There's certain guys where if they're getting dominated off that machine, or in a BP setting or whatever, or a drill setting, all you have to tell them is, hey, this is beating you right now. You're losing right now. And if you can say that to the right guy, you'll be, guys will step right back in and start squaring the baseball up, because all they need to be is challenged. They don't need you to tell them, hey, you're not staying stacked in your forward move when you get to 50-50. There's, that's not what they need at that moment. They need to be challenged. So that's just knowing your guys, and that's feel.
I love it. Great answer. Neil, you mentioned earlier that, and this is me maybe paraphrasing what you said, and you mentioned that we have a plan until that plan changes, or until we get hit in the face a little bit, and then you have to adjust on the fly in the dugout. So can you kind of walk us through maybe what that looks like, sounds like? Do you, I mean, just kind of take us through what you meant.
Yeah. I'm just thinking here to some examples, so I can say it smoothly. I guess a good example is, say you're facing a guy that's a sinker slider guy, and great, we're gonna work on pitches down, or we're gonna hit and make some sliders in the days leading up to it. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be different person to person as the day goes, and this isn't how I would talk to the player. So don't think this is how I'd say it. But for us coaches, this is kind of what's behind what I'm saying. Uh-huh. If the first guy in your first at bat hammers a fastball away, then that has a chance to change what the pitcher's doing. And the really good hitters, can do that chess match in their head and whatnot. But with the college guys, they're not all going to be big leaguers. And even still, not every big leaguer is the most big league thinker. There's some guys that are good because things are simple for them. So as things change, for me, I want to make it so our team is consistent. And so, like, let's say you're facing that fastball slider guy, and the guys are coming back to the dugout, and it's clear that the slider really looks like the fastball. And so they're swinging at pitches in the dirt. And I remember that as a player, like, why did I swing at that pitch that bounced in the dirt, 4 feet in front of the plate? Was I looking for that? No, I thought it was a fastball. And I thought I was going to crush it. And then at that point, after I get out, now what do I do? And so a lot of that is to succeed in your next at bat or have a chance is not getting phased by that poor at bat, not getting phased by the confusion that you had because you swung at something or got beat, that something that went bad. So for myself as a coach in the dugout at that time, especially during the game, it's important for me to have my players back. If they're really giving their at-bats away, I'm not going to be happy about that. They know I'm not going to be happy about it.
Right.
And so it's about, okay, why was that at-bat bad, and what are we going to do about it? And actually in the game, there's some games where it's what you need to say is, hey, just look for something up. Let's stay aggressive. And that's all you say, because you can't go too far down into that. But there are some hitters where it's like, hey, especially if they don't struggle at that and you see that they are struggling at it, why'd you swing at that? What do you got? And the guy's like, oh, man, it looks like a fastball. And I might even say, like, okay, let's look up. And if you take a couple fastballs down for strikes, I'm okay with that, because maybe that's what the adjustment that you need to make. Or maybe the guy, yeah, he's throwing that slider, but it's never a strike. So for the young hitters, they're not always able to see those things that us as coaches, that's our little checklist of, does he throw the slider for strikes? Hey, he's not throwing it for strikes at all. So you can tell your team, hey, he's not throwing that pitch for strikes. Let's be more disciplined, So to answer that, it's when something affects you, okay, what are you going to do about it? And so for us as coaches, it's great if you can think about what to do, but then you also have to make the choice of what you say to the players. And you got to be very careful with that. And oftentimes just kind of doing less, you'll find that some players make the adjustments on their own or they go through that experience. And lastly, it really helps as the years go. You know, if that player that swings with that slider down, it's his first time doing that because he's a freshman, it's probably going to take him a little time, and that might be something that takes some weeks or months for you to kind of work on how to make that improvement. But if he's a junior and you can say, hey, you remember last year against so-and-so when you're going through this and you made that adjustment, let's do that right now. And then he'll go, oh, click, got it. And he goes in, and his at-bat has a better chance to succeed after that. So hopefully that answers the question. It's you know, hitting is evolving, and you got to know your team, your players, and look out there and help.
John, one thing that Neil said that I think is important too is ask questions. So I think that if you see a guy struggling, instead of going up and just be ready to give him advice, ask him what's going on. Hey, what do you got? How you feeling? Are you seeing the baseball? Are you balanced? Are you relaxed? Do you need to focus on your breathing? But I think asking them, and if they straight up say like, I honestly didn't see it, well, why didn't we see it? Then we can evaluate it as a coach. But you know, I think kind of touching on what Neil was saying is sometimes we're in such a big hurry to tell them how smart we are and how much we know about hitting and try to help them immediately. And you know, it's like we want to show everybody how good this report is that we did. We want to give all this information. We're gonna tell you. And a lot of times the best thing to do, and what a lot of good hitting coaches that I've talked to do is know when to back off, and know when to, you know, let them internalize it, self-evaluate, and then when they really need you, that's when you can be there to step in. But I think a lot of us are quick to go in and tell them exactly how they're failing and why they're failing and what they need to do to not fail. And when you do that, a lot of times it can just put more burden on a player. So you have to be careful and know when giving someone something is going to be too much for them, and when it's not too much for them.
I love that. And one of the questions on the sidebar that I thought was really, really good, and both of you have that Fullerton background, so obviously Ken Revisa inspired. And so the question was, when guys start pressing mentally, do you help them with cues, breathing techniques, or techniques to try and recalibrate them and get them to focus on the now? And do cues differ when you're trying to help them in the AB, the inning, the game, or just in different situations?
Neil, let me say one thing real quick, and then you talk about Revisa because you know him a
Go
lot
for it.
better than I do. But when guys are struggling, a lot of times it's not swinging, it's conversations that need to be had. A lot of times, you got to get to the bottom of why they're struggling. Are they struggling because they lack confidence? Are they struggling because they're hurt? You know, there could be several different reasons why a guy might be struggling. Does he have off the field stuff going on? So like I said, we have to be smart enough to know when not to go right back to a mechanical fix for everything. That goes back to the black and white about hitting. It's not black and white. There's tons of gray, man. So, you know, I think that we have to understand our guys. We have to have conversations with them. And a lot of times you can help guys through conversation. Just realize where they're at. When guys lack confidence, a lot of times it's because they can't relax and kind of simplify in the box. So I've used the analogy of when you're struggling, you have thousands of things going through your head about your swing, about your timing, about the pitcher, about what he's going to throw. And then when you're going really good, it's pretty clear. It's really simplified. So breathing techniques and you know, we were fortunate as players to work with Ken Revisa and actually as coaches have him around as well and hear him talk a lot. And Neil knows him a lot better than most people in the world. So I'm going to let him touch more on that. But just being able to use those breathing techniques along with some visualization stuff of, I like to send our guys a lot of video on themselves having success when you can. So I think that just them seeing themselves over and over again having success, especially when they're struggling, it might be like, oh man, that looks nice. I like how that looks, and help them to start getting back on their own side. But Ken was an awesome resource, and like you said, a lot of us were fortunate and a lot of his stuff was so simple and innate for a lot of people, but for some people it took a lot of work to understand exactly how to get and understand what he was trying to teach you. But I'll let Neil talk more about that.
Gotcha. Jonathan, you have that sheet of paper. Are you able to put that up?
I do.
It might
Let me
help with
grab.
this answer. And I don't know how this works. I'm new to, well, I'm now starting to get real experience with the Zoom thing due to this whole situation, but I don't know if this is podcast or Zoom, but for the people that are on right now, this is just a sheet that we gave our guys in our first hitters meeting. You could make it so you see the whole thing. And this is answering the mental question. But ideally, and I thought this would be good to kind of organize a lot of the stuff we're saying. And I think this stuff applies, to coaches at any level, but this just happens to be how we organize stuff. And as we talk about this a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, at Northridge, Eddie Cornejo's with me, and, us two doing the offensive, position player stuff, it really helps because he can convey the same kind of things. We work on this together. Can you zoom it out a little bit so it shows the bottom? Yeah, there we go. So when it comes to the mental stuff, everyone knows like breathing and routines, but this is something we gave to our players, and up at the top it shows some team offense stuff. So it's talking about what's important. We're not a professional team where all 9 hitters can hit homers every at bat that they're up. That's just not how it works. So sometimes we got to manufacture runs, and you're going to face some Friday night guys that are special in college baseball, and even the guys that end up being in the big leagues hitters wise, they're young hitters when they're in college. So you're going to have some ups and downs. Being a versatile offense is important. And when we talk to them, we start by going over the foundations of hitting, and we start there, which is kind of like the physical stuff with the swing. Then once that's in a reasonable place, we go to the approach. And then a little bit later, we start getting to the mental. Some of that's because it's a lot easier to work on mental stuff when the guys are struggling. And they're not necessarily struggling in the fall like they will in the spring. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's tough is, it's easy to breathe and have a good routine when you're not rattled. But, when you are, it's hard for that stuff to make sense. So somewhat what I found that really helps, something as simple as, the unselfish we over me, that can help hitters in the box so much. Mm-hmm. And before you even get to breathing or routines, if they're just going up there fully bought into their team, that puts them in a better mental place. On base over hits, that comes up because, we got a runner in scoring position and we're down by 1 run. Now I got to do something. So if you can kind of get to some of those things leading up to the season, and this list is made basically by coming across all kinds of things where stuff has failed. So, our guys are trying too hard with runners in scoring position because they're, they need that run, or they're hitting 220, so they're trying to get hits. Okay, let's write that down. Let's review that next year so we're not chasing it. But I leave the mental part here blank, and you can take that off or leave it up, whatever you think is good. But I leave the mental stuff blank at the start because I think in the fall, as you're getting to know guys, you want to start trying to figure out how they are. And if they are struggling, then you start figuring out what to do. And a routine is just something to get you to have the best chance to succeed. And so what that means is different person to person.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it on that sheet, it says, you know, one of the first things is in the swing part is where you stand in the batter's box, which might seem really simple, but we got carved up by Gonzaga this year. And one of the main reasons was we weren't standing, you know, as a group in positions that allowed us to handle outside pitches. And we talked about it, like,
Mm-hmm.
and it still was breaking down. So if that's important, that needs to be part of your routine. You go in there and you touch the, you know, certain part of the plate or whatever, so you make sure you're standing in the right spot. That's not mental, so to speak, but it is. So, you know, if a guy's failing, you can figure out what they're struggling with, and then you try to make a routine that's going to give them a chance to not do that. If they get really hard on themselves, make it so they say something to themselves where they're positive or aggressive or, you know, thinking externally. You know, and it could be like, let's go, you know, look at my bat, take a deep breath. So you work through that stuff, but just like the approach stuff, you don't want to have it be taking over their game so that they forget to see the ball and hit the ball. And then lastly, the breathing stuff, like all stuff, you got to work on it. So it's good to have guys breathe, understand breathing, you know, have them work on their routines in parts of batting practice or the cage. And, you know, but it's different person to person, and just like approach or working on a certain part of the swing, you got to analyze, you know, your player, your group, what do they need? And that's how you find the answers to that. But the reason I share that sheet is if you can really talk on a lot of the team offense or swing stuff, the controllable physical, those kinds of things, then a lot of times that helps the mental stuff where, you know, they really are up there and it's simple and they are present and they don't have to have a routine for that. They're just totally bought into, you know, get the next guy up or whatever the saying is.
I'm going to piggyback off that, but just, you know, one of the things, since we're all in such a unique position right now with not being able to be on a field, not being able to be with our guys that we're, you know, we're used to being able to be with them all the time. But one of the things that we've challenged our guys with is work on the stuff like breathing techniques, and visualization, and balance, and, you know, just your foundation and your setup. Work on the things that oftentimes at this time in the year we wouldn't be working a lot on. You know, there might be times where we get the guys in as a group and say, hey, things are racing on us, so we need to settle it down. So let's go through a breathing exercise or whatever. But right now we have so much time and opportunity to help our guys really dive into, you know, what it means to go through a visualization exercise, or what it means to understand the importance of breathing. And along with that is giving our guys, which has been a big challenge of mine, is making sure that our guys have a plan and things that they can use right now to get better, even if a lot of them don't have access to cages right now. So we have a lot of guys, you know, we have some guys that either have one in their backyard or can get into one that because they know a guy and he leaves the back door open right now or whatever, and they're in there by themselves. But some guys don't have a tee, you know, they might not even have baseballs. So the challenge is getting them to work on the mentality of hitting, without being able to actually hit baseballs, which is a unique area to attack it, because it's not what we've normally be doing right now. So not being able to be in a cage with guys, but giving them drills and ideas on how to focus on their setup and their, like I said, their foundation, and really reevaluate, like, am I at a point in my setup, in my load, in my move where I'm unbalanced or unathletic, and having them figure that out and be able to continue to work on it. There's a lot of guys that I really respect as hitting guys when it comes to just straight swing stuff. And I know Doug, who we all know, Doug Latta, and you know, he's told me that 90% of the setup and load stuff that guys will do is without a bat. You know, and that was kind of new to me, but having been around him and been around guys that have been around him, Just being able to kind of work my load and evaluate, like, okay, am I getting too far over my backside? Is my head, over my backside to where I get into an unpowerful or unbalanced position? Well, can I adjust that and can I work on it to where it becomes a move that you don't even have to think about and it becomes very easy? So that's all the stuff that we're trying to do right now to help our guys, along with, challenging them from the mental aspect. Neil touched on being aggressive, and kind of talking about approach, runners in scoring position. Well, as coaches, we all see the stat. As a team, we're hitting 218 runners in scoring position, and we want to talk about it. And we might say, hey, we got to get better. How do we get better runners in scoring position? Well, you can make it worse by, like, every time now a guy gets on second base, and now all of a sudden the whole team's thinking, like, well, I hope we get a hit, because now we're talking about runners in scoring position. So, you have to, kind of be careful with that stuff. We had a thing where we were trying to toy with, we as a program are really big. We think limiting strikeouts is going to really help lead to success. But how do you limit strikeouts? So everybody talks about the 2-strike adjustments and battling and widening up the zone. And Neil and I were fortunate to play with Justin Turner in college. And one of the things that he's told me is, and he's told Neil, is he shrinks the zone with 2 strikes, which I think is a really unique perspective. But he's also in the big leagues, and those guys aren't missing there, giving 2 balls off the plate either way, the umpires. But he shrinks the zone because if he tries to think about widening the zone, he chases. And so that was an approach that he takes. And I think that, it's just a different way to look at it than what I've ever looked at it before as. So what we were going to try to do with our guys right before the season ended was we were going to try to, basically take a 2-strike in our 2-strike situation and try to treat it like you were 0-0 or 1-0, or stay in aggressive. I think staying aggressive as a hitter is something that goes by the wayside for a lot of guys, and especially when they're struggling, is just because they're swinging doesn't mean they're staying aggressive. So let's not confuse that. They might be swinging at balls all over the place. That's not aggressive. That's just not having a plan and not seeing the baseball. But I think when guys get in there and they're passive, they become a lot worse as hitters. So if you can preach, stay aggressive, attack the baseball, stay in an aggressive mindset, get to 2 strikes, that doesn't mean I'm in a passive mindset. The moment we become passive, especially with 2 strikes, the moment we become passive, I get balls thrown by me. So I have to stay in an aggressive mindset as a hitter. And when I say aggressive, that doesn't mean open my zone up and swing at everything. Aggressive means see the baseball with an aggressive swing mentality, and then trust that my eyes are going to tell me not to swing.
I love that. That's great. Strength of zone, huh? Really cool. Cool concept. And I think with 2 strikes, I think we could ask everybody in the room right now what their 2-strike approach was, and they may all be different. You could ask every player what theirs is. It may all be different. And but I really like hearing that, because it's, and to your point, with aggression, if you don't ever get to 2 strikes, it's really hard to get, to strike out. So Neil, anything to add as far as just 2-strike approach, aggression with 2 strikes, anything like that, or you want to move on to another question?
I would just say this is one of the things that I think isn't touched on with 2 strikes a lot, is how many hitters are trying to swing early to not get to 2 strikes. And especially with young hitters, and young hitters could be a freshman in college. It could be a guy in AA that isn't what he'll be in the big leagues. We're all scared of striking out, and I think it's important to address your hitters and find out if they're striking out more because they don't want to strike out, or if they are turning counts around or putting balls in play that they shouldn't early because they don't want to strike out. Like, oh, I rolled over on the first pitch 6-3, but I didn't strike out. So, breaking that stuff down to find out what you're working with
So true.
is important even before you get to two strikes. And I find that's the case a lot, even with some good hitters.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna give one more story. We have a hitter real quick, and this will be short, but we have a hitter that is a grinder. I mean, this guy is what everybody wants out of a player. He's going to work. He's going to take the at bats you want. But he, in the fall, and one of my biggest things when we brought him in was that he strikes out, and trying to know that as a team offense, we're trying to limit that. So he would go up in the fall, and he's a good hitter, 0-0. He's a good hitter, 1-0. He's a good hitter, 0-1. As the moment he got to two strikes, he became a guy that chased out of the zone. He became a guy that would be uncharacteristic with his swing. Well, he also made a major physical adjustment with two strikes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that that's bad. I think that there are a lot of guys that make physical adjustments with two strikes, and I'm by no means saying that don't do that. But for this guy in particular, he would make his two-strike adjustment physically, and he's a guy that strikes out one out of every four at bats. So in a conversation that we had, it was, hey, why do you do that? Well, I widen out because I want to see the ball better. I want to simplify. Okay, well, how many swings are you taking in your daily work from that position? Well, not very many, blah, blah, blah. So the only time he's working on that is when he gets to two strikes. And he strikes out a lot every time he does that. So my challenge to him was, hey, let's not make as much of a physical adjustment, and try to treat that 0-2 or 1-2 or 2-2 count, 3-2 even, try to treat that like you're in a hitter's count. And just changing the mentality makes him a better hitter. So, you look at the best hitters, the guys that really understand the zone, they're not afraid to get to two strikes because they trust themselves. The guys that are bad two-strike hitters haven't conquered that mentality yet of like, hey, I still have life. I can still hit a baseball in a gap right now. I can still, take a good swing on a pitch, because pitchers make bad pitches with two strikes sometimes. So.
Sure. Absolutely. Love those answers, guys. And again, it's just like everything else. It all depends. That's such a lawyer answer, but it is so true. And I think you guys have done a great job of conveying the fact that we've got to get to know our players, get their trust, and get to understand how they're thinking. And then we can help them put themselves in their best positions. But a couple more questions before you go. A mutual friend of ours, Craig Hyatt, who's literally like the follow on Twitter, whenever we figured out or you guys were going to come on, he wanted me to ask you, which if Craig asked you to do something, you do it. But he asked, how do you give individual attention to players during practice? Because we've all been there. It's really hard when you've got a large group of guys and you've got a very short time period. But how do you take those guys aside and give them the individual attention that they need and want to get better versus looking at it holistically as an entire team?
Go ahead, man.
I think that's for myself personally, that sheet of paper that kind of outlines everything, that stuff's going to apply to everyone. So as hitters. And so I want to be checking those boxes and building up their ability to do those things. And I know it's going to apply to everyone. And we want to create a practice structure where all the guys are going to know what they need to do in general. This is how BP works. This is how the cage works. And ideally, you want that machine to kind of be able to run on its own. And a lot of the success of that really is helped by your support staff, the people around you, the rest of the coaching staff. Mm-hmm. We all know what it's like if you don't feel like you have as much help as you'd want. If you have good help around you, it strengthens everything. Mm-hmm. But if you can get the machine working and you have your group know the basics that they need to be working on. So if you're not in the cage, they have some basics of, the structure of how they do stuff. If you happen to not be by the bubble, that they have been educated to, know what they're doing. then that allows you to have the freedom to be checking in with the individuals. And the obvious answer is you try to do early work, or you try to do one-on-one stuff as much as possible. But our guys' schedule is really busy. We need to make sure they have balance, and then we also have rules, the NCAA rules, which limit us. So, in the middle of practice, I think if you can create the practice environment and it takes time and it's not easy, but if you can create it where the machine's kind of going, then you can be checking in with the individuals and customizing stuff to what they do. And we try to allow our batting practice to allow a lot of time for individuality. Same with the cage. And we spend the start of the fall trying to put in examples of things that can be done, that a variety of drills even, let's say, or a variety of things to do in BP. And then once they're aware of that, it's okay. When you go into batting practice, we may have, certain parts of the round that everybody's the same, but after that, there needs to be some individuality where
Sure.
you're working on your approach, your swing, whatever you need to be doing. So that's one of the toughest tasks for sure.
Yeah, it's a constant battle to try to make sure that you're giving each guy what he needs. It's in the fall, it requires a lot of organization, because like Neil was saying, like there might be a group of guys that it's best to hit with them in the morning because of their class schedule, and then the afternoon, blah, blah, blah. So I think it takes some creativity as far as how to get each guy what he needs. But what we try to do, especially in the fall, is instead of having the larger groups, is kind of categorize the groups into smaller groups, and then within each category of group, like, hey, these are our guys that we need to make sure that they're that these are our, we call them run scorers, run producers, and then the hybrids. So the run scorers are the guys that we need to get on base. So we might have some skill stuff off the machine as well, including, just the hitting stuff. And then our run scorers are the guys who aren't going to small ball much, they're going to bang. And then we have our hybrids who are kind of the split gaps and run, and can also hit the ball over the fence occasionally. So, but I think that trying to make sure that each guy has a plan individual to them, even if it is within a small group, is a good way to go about that. Because myself and Joe Meggs, who's our volunteer, we end up having small groups for about 5 hours in the fall, which it can really be daunting to keep the energy and the focus that those guys need. But we find that it's better to do it that way than to have 2 or 3 bigger groups and get it done in an hour and a half, because then I don't think the guys get the individual attention that they need. And then the reality, the sad reality to, kind of, this isn't a ploy to the, the third paid assistant thing or anything, but the sad reality is once the spring comes along, is time is limited, especially for, what we haven't even touched on today is the fact that recruiting plays a big factor into how available we are as assistants. Like even if we're there for practice, we might be leaving right after, we might be flying in or flying home, and getting to practice at the start of practice. So just accessibility to your coaches is a big deal. So I think that a big important part of it all is recruiting guys that love baseball. If you recruit guys that love to work and they love baseball, and you can give them the foundation like Neil's talking about, we're not going to be able to spend 5 hours a week in the cage with each individual guy. It's just not the way that our structure is set up. It's impossible. It's illegal by the rules. And so we have to do our best to educate them as much as possible, and then trust that they're going to get to the work on their own in the evenings, because you won't have a successful team if guys aren't getting in and working extra on their own, because we are so limited on time. So that is a huge factor of it, is recruit the guys that want to get better. And then as you start to implement what you value and what you find is important, and you build the trust with guys, you find that they end up working on the stuff that you want them to work on at night, even if you can't be there. And then one of the other things that I think is important, and I'm probably in a unique opinion here on this one, but I don't even care if our guys go hit with other guys because I trust them. So, and by saying that, what I mean is like they're going to go home for at Christmas break. Well, they've got a guy that they've hit with for the last 6-7 years or whatever. I don't expect them to not go hit with that guy. I don't expect them to, I don't have that kind of ego in this thing. What I do expect them is if they find something that works for them that they like, we communicate about it, we talk about it, and we go through it together. And we might reevaluate it and say like, hey, this is why I don't think we should do that. This is why I think that's awesome. But we can always get better. The sad truth of the matter is we are limited with time. So I don't want our guys to not work. And so if that means they have to go hit with another guy in the winter break or whatever, I'm not encouraging it, but it doesn't scare me, because I think if you build the trust with those guys, they're going to do things that are going to help make them better if you've educated them well enough. So guys have to work on their own.
No, a fantastic answer, and I know you guys have to go, but if you got time for one more, there was one just asked about technology that's come up a couple of different times. Technology or just resources. If you guys could, and you don't necessarily have to go into detail on how you use them, but just some different things that you use that you like. I think we've all dabbled in a little bit of everything, but we may not use everything on a daily basis. So if there's anything that you guys use and you trust and you love and it's a staple in your program, do you guys mind sharing that?
I know that we have a lot of nice things, which is, we're fortunate in that way. One of the things that we will do is we use Rapsodo a lot. We're getting TrackMan put in, and we have some of that stuff. I like to make competitions out of using those, those resources. So we do a lot of stuff where maybe at the end of a hitting session, we might go team versus team where they jump in, they get one swing. And on the Rapsodo, if you look at if you basically look at where the highest batting averages are in the big leagues, if you look in that 7 degree to 16-degree range, the good line drive, we'll just play games based off of the Rapsodo. And sometimes I think that they read it wrong, but baseball's not fair. So we kind of treat it like that. Like a guy might square a ball up and it says it was at 30 degrees or whatever. So it doesn't count, but they get points basically being in that degree setting because it's fun and it gives them something to kind of play with. And, for people that don't have Rapsodo, that doesn't mean you can't play this game. Just put 2 lines up at the end of the cage and kind of let them go off the machine. And I think a cool thing is letting them kind of run through that and using that technology. We have a lot of the nice stuff, and we'll use it. The best thing we have is video systems. I think that as much as you can videotape your guys. One of the things that we use that is like a $2.99 app on the iPad or the phone is just a delay setting. So we'll have a setup often where our guys will have a side iPad for their round of BP. And then when they come out, it's on like a 40-second delay. So they watch their round from the side. And that is something that if you have an iPhone and you have $2.99 to spare, $2.99 to spare, you can get that. And I think it's free actually with the ad-free one if you don't
Nice.
mind ads. So, but just having something like that, I think it's cool because guys get out and they can see what they're doing. They can see the swing. They can see what they're working on. And oftentimes we have our screen up in the cages and we'll run the Rapsodo stuff up there. But ultimately, I think you have to use that stuff to develop a competitive atmosphere as much as anything else. I like to look at how often guys are hitting the ball hard. So for our leading hitter on the team this year, he's a small left-handed hitter. His max velo off of a certain machine might be 96, but if he's constantly 88 to 94 in that range, that's great. Now for our big boppers, we want them to be in the 95 plus range. So we might have different standards for each guy based off of what success would be for them as an individual, but just kind of measuring how often they're hitting the ball hard in their upper, realm of that exit velo. So, but we don't dive too much into all that as far as like just living off of that. It is something that we do, but we use it more to provide energy and provide intent, get guys to swing with intent, get guys to swing with focus than we do to really evaluate.
Yeah, like I've been around TrackMan, done some cool force plate stuff. Slow motion cameras are neat. I coached golf for those 2 years, and golf is at the time, especially, a lot farther ahead than baseball. Baseball's caught up in some ways now, and it's just a different sport because the ball's flying in the air. It's not on a tee. But I think a lot of those are just they're ways that can help you become more aware of certain things as a coach. So, when it comes to K-vests and different things that measure what's going on that you may not be able to see with the naked eye, that's neat. But a lot of that stuff's expensive. And so not everyone has access to that. And certainly you can have success without it. If it's not something you can come across and you're a high school coach or a coach that doesn't have access to it, that's totally fine. And then it's also like Ronnie says, it's neat to have that help your training environment and showing the measurement of the swing, showing what the ball's doing number wise, is cool. So it lets the players see some things they may not be seeing if it isn't there, and lets the coaches know as well. But coaches for a long time have been doing some of the things that the technology can do. They've been recording barrels. They've been telling guys to hit the ball farther, hit the ball over the fence. You're talking about ball flight there. And we like to do no hook, no fade rounds. And that's, the poor man's version of square the ball up well, probably make it spin right. That speaks a little bit about your swing and what you're doing with your body. So, if you happen to not have access to some of that stuff, there's different ways that you can, touch on some of those things. And I think that's kind of a neat thing. And then lastly, I think it's a balance where, something as simple as video, which has been around for a long time, obviously, some hitters can just dive down the video rabbit hole and use that as like the most important thing to them. And there's definitely some value to having body awareness and being able to have a sense of your swing and being external as opposed to internal and internal into the computer. So it's cool to have access to that stuff, and a lot of it is real good. And it's, each coach's choice, essentially, how you're balancing out that stuff. But you can get some things done even if you don't have access to it.
I'm going to touch on build off of Neil's thing too a little bit, but just saying, like, one of the coolest things that we are looking forward to being able to do, especially with the TrackMan, and we do with the Rapsodo already, is and one of the most important things I think about when I talk about hitting is, I was fortunate. I got the opportunity to have a conversation with Craig Counsell a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying how they have all this data and information, and and it takes almost like a scientist to read some of this stuff. So how do you simplify that for your guys? Well, if you can take your data and understand as a coach who doesn't swing and miss and who doesn't swing at balls. So if they can look at guys that don't swing and miss and don't swing at balls, those are the guys that tend to have the most success, which is a super simplified version of all this stuff and all these charts and graphs that you could get. But that's just a really cool thing. I think that it doesn't take a lot of scientific measuring tools to understand, like, hey, don't swing at balls, and when you swing, don't miss. And if you have a lot of those guys, they're probably going to be pretty successful. But understanding hot zones and that kind of stuff is really cool with some of that data and technology, being able to know that, hey, we're going to face on Friday night, we're going to face a heavy fastball guy that's typically up in the zone. Well, you might have 3 guys in your lineup that really struggle with anything up in the zone, especially if it's firm. So you might be able to adjust your lineup based on information that you got from the technology, which is, that stuff is real, and that stuff is valuable. But I think to kind of build everything all the time around that stuff can be scary and can make you basically almost like robotic as a team and as a unit. One drill that Neil mentioned, the no hook, no fade, that I would like to share with everyone, because I know we're getting close to the end here, is something that we do a lot, especially in the fall. But on the main diamond is I call it no rollovers. So basically no rollover on the pull side. And you talk about a drill that kind of takes some mentality and understanding, but once guys really understand what you're trying to get out of it, there's a lot of accountability that comes there. So you start it basically by saying, like, hey, basically if you roll over a pitch, if you top spin a ball on the ground to the pull side, so as a left-handed hitter to the right field line side of the second baseman, as a right-hander, left field line of the shortstop, you're out, your round's over. And you start to get guys to really focus on their swing, on their approach, on not doing that. And what it does for a lot of guys is it puts pressure on them. And before you know it, they might have been raking, and all of a sudden we start doing that drill and it's roll over, roll over, roll over, because they haven't been able to kind of take that pressure and apply it. So you're putting pressure on them to do that, number one. And then what we want when we go to the pull side is that air. We want air to the pull side. We don't want ground to the pull side. So it kind of teaches them that. And then the best part about that drill, in my opinion, is it teaches guys to understand which locations of a pitch that I can swing at, that I can be successful with and not get my round cut short to a 1 or 2 swings. If there's a certain pitch that the BP thrower is throwing, and every time I swing at it, I roll over, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to learn not to swing at that pitch. So it becomes a plate discipline and kind of pitch selection drill as much as anything, which I think is super valuable. But when you start that, you'll have guys that are really frustrated. They might go through a 10-minute BP round and only get 6 swings. But the more they buy into it and the more they do it, they understand the importance of it, and they'll get better at it. So, and then the accountability factor is, what I tell them is, I'm not going to kick you out of the cage. You need to own it yourself. If you roll over, if it's a questionable one, it's up to you to decide. And their teammates will rib them. They'll start giving them a hard time, but it becomes a fun thing where it's like, like guys try to cheat and get extra swings, and their teammates are like, hey, get out of there, man, it's a rollover. And that goes back to the accountability factor of all this stuff, and these guys understanding, that they have to take accountability with their own swing and ownership of it and all of that. So even with the drills.
Man, that's fantastic, and I love the ideas behind it. Man, it's whenever I heard you talk in the fall, Neil, at the ball yard, or last summer, whenever it was, and the no hook, no fade, I love that, and the no rollover. I mean, it's something that no matter the technology or the lack of that we've got, it's something that's simple, but it makes so much sense. I'm going to leave your Twitter contact info in the chat. I'll throw that in there, and then I'll put it in the show notes. But before you guys go, is there anything else that you'd like to leave our listeners? We really appreciate your time, and I think we went a little bit over on the time that I told you guys. But man, it was worth every minute on my part, and I hope it was on yours. But Neil, is there anything else that you'd like to tell our listeners or leave with them before you go? And then Ronnie, will end with you.
I mean, this is really cool, and especially at this time where, whether we like it or not, there's some parts of coaching that have slowed down. It's really neat to be able to hear all the different people talk. There's a variety of podcasts and Zoom calls that have been going on, and it's also, you got a little more time to call some of your friends in coaching and check on stuff. So that's been really neat. And I think it's easy to just be within your own coaching staff, where you show up to the field and you got the small group around you. But the more that we can be aware of what other people are doing, whether it's good, bad, or different, doesn't matter. just being exposed to stuff is great. So I'm real happy to be a part of this, and the whole community that's, trying to get better is pretty neat, and there's a lot of learning going on. So I'm just happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, same with me. I mean, it's we're fortunate to be able to be in the positions we are as coaches. And, I've got former teammates, former players, former or current coworkers, former coworkers that are kind of listening in. And it's fun to be able to talk with Neil and you guys about hitting and baseball. So we are definitely in a fortunate position as coaches, and we are all trying to get better. Sometimes that kind of gets forgotten on when we're talking about hitting, and especially when guys get into it too much. There's no one right way or one wrong way. I believe, we have a lot of guys that are helping the cause and coming up with new strategies to make guys better. But ultimately, hitting is hitting, and you have to get in the box and want to compete. So it's fun to hear different ideas from different guys, and I appreciate the opportunity to get on here and talk. I get to talk to Neil all the time, so he and I get to chat pretty regularly. So, but it was fun to get to share with you guys, and I appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
On Neil, sorry, it is Neil Walton 11. I'll make sure that I fix that in the show notes. But guys, I appreciate your time. It was an awesome conversation today. I've got a ton of notes that I'm going to have to decompress and go through myself. But looking forward to future conversations. And thanks again for joining us.
Keep doing it, John.
Thank you.
Good stuff, man.
Appreciate it.